The rain hammered against the windows of the military recruitment office as Colonel James Mitchell reviewed the morning's applications. At 52, he had seen every type of person walk through those doors seeking to serve their country. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside, shaking droplets from her dark hair. Colonel Mitchell glanced up briefly, then did a double-take. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing jeans so faded they were nearly white at the knees, and an oversized jacket that had seen better days. Her sneakers were held together with duct tape, and her backpack appeared to be her only possession. "Can I help you?" asked Sergeant Davis from behind the front desk, his tone professional but slightly dismissive as he took in her appearance. "I'd like to speak with someone about enlisting," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite her nervous fidgeting with the zipper on her jacket. The sergeant looked her up and down skeptically. "Do you have identification? High school diploma? Any documentation?" She nodded, reaching into her backpack and producing a carefully protected folder. Her hands were clean but calloused, and Colonel Mitchell noticed several small scars across her knuckles. She handed over her documents with the careful precision of someone who had learned the importance of paperwork the hard way. Colonel Mitchell found himself studying her more closely. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that spoke of discipline despite her appearance. She stood straight, feet shoulder-width apart, hands at her sides when not reaching for documents. It was almost as if she was already at attention. "What's your name?" Sergeant Davis asked, as he reviewed her papers. "Sarah Chen," she replied. "I know, I don't look like much right now. But I'm serious about this. I've wanted to serve since I was a kid." The colonel rose from his desk and approached. Something about her drew his attention, though he couldn't quite place what it was. "Miss Chen, what brings you to the military?" She looked directly at him, her brown eyes clear and determined. "Sir, I've been on my own for 3 years now. I've worked every job I could find, saved every penny, and I know what I want. I want purpose. I want to serve something bigger than myself." Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. He had heard similar words from countless recruits, but there was something different in her delivery. No bravado, no romantic notions about military life, just quiet determination. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Originally from Seattle, sir. My parents died in a car accident when I was 17. I've been moving around since then, working odd jobs, trying to figure out my path." The sergeant handed back her documents. "Everything seems to be in order. You'll need to take the ASVAB test, complete a physical, everything, and go through the interview process." Sarah nodded. "When can I start?" "The next testing session is tomorrow at 8 a.m., Sergeant Davis informed her. "You'll need to be here by 7:30 for check-in." IT. Sergeant Davisation. IT. "I'll be here," she said without hesitation. As she turned to leave, Colonel Mitchell noticed something that made him pause. When she adjusted her jacket, pulling it closer around herself, he caught a glimpse of something dark on her left shoulder blade. It looked like ink, but he couldn't make out the design clearly. "Miss Chen," he called out. She stopped and turned back. "Yes, sir. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Somewhere to get a good meal?" She hesitated for just a moment. "I'll figure it out, sir. I always do." The colonel studied her face. No self-pity, no plea for help, just quiet acceptance of her circumstances. "There's a decent hotel about 6 blocks from here. The Riverside Inn. Tell them Colonel Mitchell sent you. They'll give you a fair rate." "Thank you, sir, but I can't afford a hotel. There's a small diner next to it, Martha's Place. They serve good food, and they're hiring for night shift dishwashing. Mention my name there too." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Why would you help me?" Colonel Mitchell considered the question. Why was he helping her? "Because something tells me you're exactly the kind of person the military needs, Miss Chen. Get some rest, get some food, and show me tomorrow that my instincts are right." She straightened even more, if that was possible. "You won't regret it, sir, I promise." After she left, Sergeant Davis shook his head. "Colonel, We see dozens like her every month. Kids with nothing, looking for the military to save them. Maybe, Colonel Mitchell replied, still watching through the window as Sarah walked purposefully down the street despite the rain. But something about her is different. Did you notice how she carried herself? Like she's been through hell and came out stronger, the sergeant admitted. Exactly. The colonel returned to his desk, but found himself distracted for the rest of the day. There had been something about Sarah Chen that reminded him of his best soldiers, not the ones who came from military families or those seeking adventure, but the ones who had been tested by life and emerged with unbreakable determination. That evening, he found himself driving past Martha's diner. Through the window, he could see Sarah in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, working steadily at the dish station. Even from the parking lot, he could see she was giving the job her complete attention, the same focus she had shown in his office. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the recruitment office at 7:15, wearing the same clothes but somehow looking more put together. Her hair was neatly braided, and despite obviously having worked all night, she appeared alert and ready. "Did you get any sleep?" Colonel Mitchell asked. "A few hours, sir. Martha let me rest in the break room after my shift ended at 4. The testing went smoothly. Sarah scored exceptionally well on the ASVAB, particularly in the mechanical and technical sections. Her physical fitness was impressive for someone who appeared to be surviving on minimal nutrition. During the interview portion, Colonel Mitchell learned more about her background. She had essentially raised herself after her parents' death, working construction, landscaping, restaurant jobs, anything that would pay enough to survive. She had no criminal record, no debt, and no family ties that might complicate military service. "Why the Army specifically?" he asked. "I researched all the branches, sir. The Army offers the most diverse career fields and the best opportunities for someone like me to build a real future." "Someone like you?" She met his gaze steadily. "Someone who has nothing to lose and everything to prove." As the interview concluded, Sarah stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir." When she shook his hand, her jacket sleeve pulled back slightly, and Colonel Mitchell caught another glimpse of the tattoo on her shoulder. This time, he could make out what appeared to be military insignia, but it was partially obscured. "Miss Chen," he said as she prepared to leave. "That tattoo on your shoulder? What is it?" She froze for a moment, her hand instinctively moving to cover the area. "It's personal, sir. I understand, but tattoos can sometimes affect military service. We'll need to document any visible markings during your medical examination." Sarah looked down, then back up at him. "It's military-related, sir. From my grandfather." "Your grandfather served?" "Yes, sir. Korean War. He died when I was 16, but he told me stories about his service. He always said I had the heart of a soldier." Colonel Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the way she said it, the reverence in her voice, struck him deeply. "What branch did he serve in?" "Army, sir. He was very proud of his service." The colonel nodded slowly. "We'll need to see it during your medical exam, but I don't anticipate any issues if it's military-related." Sarah left that day with a date for her medical examination and final processing. Colonel Mitchell found himself thinking about her story throughout the afternoon. Something about her grandfather's military service seemed to resonate with her in a way that went beyond simple family pride. That evening, he called his old friend, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, who conducted the medical examinations for recruits. "Pat, I've got a young woman coming in tomorrow for her medical, Sarah Chen. Pay special attention to a tattoo on her left shoulder blade. I have a feeling there's more to the story there." "You sound intrigued, James. That's not like you." "She's different, Pat. There's something about her that reminds me of the best soldiers I've ever served with, but I can't shake the feeling that she's carrying something heavy with her." "I'll take good care of her," Dr. Gonzalez assured him. "Any particular concerns? Just be thorough, and if she wants to talk about that tattoo, listen. I think it might be important." The next morning brought clear skies, and Sarah arrived early for her medical examination. Colonel Mitchell watched from his office window as she walked across the parking lot with the same purposeful stride he had noticed before. Dr. Gonzalez later called him with the results. She's in excellent health, James. A little underweight, probably from irregular meals, but otherwise perfect for military service. And about that tattoo. What about it? You need to see it for yourself. She gave me permission to show you. Can you come down to the medical office? Colonel Mitchell made his way downstairs, curiosity building with each step. Dr. Gonzalez led him to her office, where Sarah was waiting, looking slightly nervous. Sir, Dr. Gonzalez said you wanted to see my tattoo, Sarah said quietly. Only if you're comfortable showing it, Miss Chen. But yes, I'm curious. Sarah nodded and carefully removed her jacket, then lifted her shirt to reveal her left shoulder blade. Colonel Mitchell felt his breath catch in his throat. The tattoo was a perfect recreation of a military unit patch, rendered in precise detail. But it wasn't just any unit patch. It was the insignia of the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team, a unit that had served with distinction in Korea. Miss Chen, he said softly, where exactly did your grandfather serve? With the 187th Airborne, sir. The Rakkasans. She turned to face him, and he could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. He used to tell me about jumping into combat, about his brothers in arms. He said the unit motto was, Ne desit vertices, let valor not fail. Colonel Mitchell stared at the tattoo, his mind racing. The 187th had been his father's unit. His father had served in that same regiment, had jumped into Korea with those same brave men who had earned the nickname Rakkasans from the Japanese. What was your grandfather's name? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Master Sergeant David Chen, sir. He was a platoon sergeant with Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion. The room fell completely silent. Colonel Mitchell felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. He knew that name. His father had mentioned Sergeant Chen in letters home, had spoken of him with the highest respect and admiration. Colonel Mitchell sank into a nearby chair, staring at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Dr. Gonzalez looked between them, sensing something significant was happening but not understanding what. Sarah, the colonel said slowly, I need you to tell me everything you know about your grandfather's service. Every detail he shared with you. Sarah lowered her shirt and put her jacket back on, then sat across from him. He didn't talk about it much when I was younger. Said the memories were too heavy for a child to carry. But as I got older, especially after my parents died, he started sharing more. She paused, collecting her thoughts. He said Korea was the forgotten war. But it shouldn't be. He told me about the cold, about fighting Chinese forces in the mountains, about how the unit had to stick together to survive. He said his lieutenant was a young officer from Texas, who kept them all alive through some of the worst fighting. Colonel Mitchell felt his heart racing. Did he ever mention the lieutenant's name? Lieutenant William Mitchell, sir. Grandpa used to say he was the bravest officer he ever served under. Said Lieutenant Mitchell saved his life more than once, and that he'd follow him anywhere. The room went completely quiet. Dr. Gonzalez gasped softly, understanding dawning on her face. She had known Colonel Mitchell long enough to know his father's story. Sarah, Colonel Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. Lieutenant William Mitchell was my father. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. Your father? But that would mean your grandfather saved my father's life on Hill 578 inches November 1951. My father wrote about it in his letters home. Sergeant Chen threw himself on top of my father when Chinese grenades started going off, took shrapnel in his back and arm, but refused medical evacuation until the hill was secured. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her shoulder, where the tattoo honored her grandfather's service. He never told me he was wounded. He just said he did his duty. That sounds like him, Colonel Mitchell said with a sad smile. My father spoke of your grandfather with the deepest respect until the day he died. Said Sergeant Chen was the finest NCO he ever served with, and that he owed his life to him. Dr. Gonzalez quietly excused herself, sensing the two needed privacy for this moment. Sarah and the colonel sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the incredible connection they had just discovered. How is this possible? Sarah finally whispered. I don't know. Colonel Mitchell admitted. But I don't think it's a coincidence that you walked into my recruitment office. Your grandfather was a hero, Sarah. A real hero. And if you're anything like him, the Army is lucky to have you. Ope. Sarah began to cry then, quietly but steadily. After he died, I felt so alone. My parents were gone. I had no other family. And I was just drifting. But he always told me to remember where I came from, to honor the sacrifice of those who came before me. Is that why you got the tattoo? She nodded. I got it on the anniversary of his death. Used money I had been saving for food. The tattoo artist thought I was crazy, but I needed to carry a piece of him with me always. Colonel Mitchell stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parade ground where young soldiers were training. Sarah, I need to tell you something about your grandfather that he probably never shared with you. She looked up at him expectantly. After Korea, my father tried to keep in touch with the men from his platoon. He found out that your grandfather was awarded the Bronze Star with V device for valor during that same action on Hill 578, but Sergeant Chen never put in the paperwork to receive it. He said he was just doing his job. Sarah's breath caught. He was awarded the Bronze Star? My father kept copies of all the paperwork. He always hoped to find your grandfather someday and make sure he got the recognition he deserved. But by the time my father retired, the trail had gone cold. Grandpa never mentioned any medal. He just said he served honorably and came home when a lot of good men didn't. Colonel Mitchell turned back to face her. That's exactly what my father said about him. That Sergeant Chen embodied everything good about the American soldier. Humble, brave, dedicated to his brothers in arms. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What does this mean for my enlistment? It means, the colonel said with conviction, that you're not just joining the Army. You're continuing a legacy of service that connects our families in ways we never could have imagined. Over the next few days, Colonel Mitchell threw himself into research. He contacted military archives, reached out to veteran organizations, and even called his elderly mother, who still had boxes of his father's correspondence from Korea. What he discovered amazed him. The connection between Lieutenant Mitchell and Sergeant Chen went far deeper than just one heroic action. They had served together for over 18 months. Through multiple campaigns, his father's letters painted a picture of a partnership between officer and NCO that had kept their entire platoon alive through some of the fiercest fighting of the war. More importantly, he found the official documentation for David Chen's Bronze Star, along with recommendations for additional commendations that had somehow been lost in the bureaucratic shuffle after the war ended. When Sarah returned for her final processing, Colonel Mitchell had a surprise waiting for her. He had arranged for a small ceremony in his office, with Dr. Gonzalez and several other staff members present. Sarah Chen, he said formally, it is my honor to present you with the Bronze Star with V device that was awarded to your grandfather, Master Sergeant David Chen, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. Sarah's hands shook as she accepted the medal case. Inside was the Bronze Star her grandfather had earned but never received, along with a certificate bearing his name. There's more, Colonel Mitchell continued. I've been in contact with the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation. They want to include your grandfather's story in their next newsletter, and they're arranging for his name to be added to the memorial wall at the National Museum of the United States Army. Sarah couldn't speak. She held the medal case against her chest and wept openly. Your grandfather's legacy doesn't end with this medal, the colonel said gently. It continues with you. Every day you serve, you'll be honoring not just your country, but the memory of a man who exemplified the very best of what it means to be a soldier. When Sarah finally composed herself, she looked up at Colonel Mitchell with renewed determination. Sir, I want to request assignment to the 187th Airborne Regiment. I want to serve in my grandfather's unit. Quote, the colonel smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already spoken with the assignment officer. If you qualify for airborne school, there's a slot waiting for you with the Rakkasans. I'll qualify, Sarah said with absolute certainty. I'll make my grandfather proud. You already have, Colonel Mitchell replied. As Sarah's ship date approached, She and the colonel developed an unexpected friendship. He shared stories his father had told him about Korea, about the bitter cold and the fierce fighting, but also about the bonds forged between soldiers that lasted a lifetime. Sarah, in turn, shared more about her grandfather's later life, how he had worked as a mechanic after the war, married her grandmother, raised 3 children including Sarah's father, and always spoke with pride about his military service despite never seeking recognition for it. He used to say that serving in the army taught him what really mattered in life. Sarah told the colonel, one afternoon, loyalty, duty, selfless service. He said those weren't just words on a wall. They were principles to live by. That's exactly what my father learned from men like your grandfather, Colonel Mitchell replied. That leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about character. The night before Sarah left for basic training, Colonel Mitchell gave her one final gift. It was a framed photograph he had found among his father's things, showing a group of soldiers standing together in Korea. In the front row, a young Lieutenant William Mitchell stood next to Sergeant David Chen. I want you to take this with you, he said. It's a picture of your grandfather and my father, taken just a few days after the action that earned him the Bronze Star. Sarah studied the photograph intently. Her grandfather looked so young, but she could see the same determined expression she remembered from her childhood. Lieutenant Mitchell, barely older than Sarah herself, had his hand on Sergeant Chen's shoulder in a gesture of obvious mutual respect. They look like brothers, she observed. In every way that mattered, they were. The colonel agreed. And now, in a strange way, that brotherhood extends to us. Sarah carefully packed the photograph with her few belongings. As she prepared to leave for the bus station the next morning, she stopped by the recruitment office one last time. Colonel Mitchell was waiting for her with one final surprise. Standing beside him was an elderly Korean War veteran, wearing a 187th Airborne cap. Sarah, the colonel said, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Master Sergeant First Class Robert Kim. Retired. He served with your grandfather in Bravo Company. The old veteran's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Sarah. You look just like him, he said softly. David Chen was the best soldier I ever knew. Saved my life too, more than once. Sarah shook the veteran's hand, feeling the calluses and scars of a man who had lived through history. Thank you for serving with him, sir. It was my honor, young lady. Your grandfather would be so proud to see you carrying on the tradition. As Sarah boarded the bus for basic training, she carried with her not just her grandfather's Bronze Star and the photograph of 2 young soldiers bonded by war, but also the knowledge that she was part of something larger than herself. The thread of service and sacrifice that connected her grandfather to Lieutenant Mitchell, and now connected her to Colonel Mitchell, would continue through her own military career. Colonel Mitchell watched the bus disappear down the highway, thinking about the strange paths life sometimes takes. A homeless young woman in torn clothes had walked into his office looking for purpose, and in finding it, she had connected him to his own family's history in ways he never could have imagined. He returned to his office and sat down at his desk, where a new stack of applications waited for review. On top was a note from Sarah that she had left with Sergeant Davis. It was brief, written in the careful handwriting of someone who had learned the value of precision. Colonel Mitchell, it read. Thank you for seeing past the torn clothes to the soldier underneath. I promise to honor my grandfather's legacy and your father's memory every day I serve. The thread of service that connects our families will never be broken. With deepest gratitude and respect, Private Sarah Chen. The colonel folded the note carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, next to a letter his father had written home from Korea 68 years earlier. In that letter, Lieutenant William Mitchell had written about a brave sergeant who had saved his life, and how proud he was to serve alongside men of such character. Now, decades later, that same thread of honor and service continued through a new generation. Colonel Mitchell smiled, knowing that somewhere, the spirits of Lieutenant Mitchell and Sergeant Chen were looking down with pride at the young woman who would soon earn her place among the Rakkasans. 18 weeks later, Colonel Mitchell received a call that brought a smile to his face. It was Sarah, calling from Fort Bragg after completing both basic training and airborne school. Sir, she said, her voice filled with pride. Private Sarah Chen reporting successful completion of training. I graduate tomorrow. And I wanted you to be the first to know. How did you do? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Top of my class in basics, sir. Distinguished honor graduate. And I made it through airborne school without any problems. I earn my wings tomorrow. Colonel Mitchell felt a surge of pride that surprised him. Outstanding, Private Chen. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud. Sir, there's something else. My drill sergeant was Sergeant First Class Martinez, and when he heard my story and saw my grandfather's Bronze Star, he arranged something special for the graduation ceremony. What kind of arrangement? Master Sergeant Kim is flying in for the ceremony, sir, and several other Korean War veterans from the 187th. They want to be there when I receive my airborne wings. After the furs and the 20 augers, Colonel Mitchell felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's incredible, Sarah. What an honor. Sir, I have a request. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you consider coming to the ceremony? I know my grandfather can't be there, but having you there would mean everything to me. You're the closest thing I have to family. The colonel didn't hesitate. I'll be there, Private Chen. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then, 2 days later, Colonel Mitchell found himself at Fort Bragg, watching as Sarah Chen stood at attention with her graduating class. She looked transformed from the young woman who had walked into his office in torn clothes months earlier. Her uniform was immaculate, her bearing confident, and her eyes bright with purpose. When her name was called to receive her airborne wings, something extraordinary happened. Master Sergeant Kim, now using a walker but determined to stand, slowly made his way to the platform. The ceremony paused as the elderly veteran took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in a voice that carried across the field despite his age, today we witness something special. Private Sarah Chen is not just receiving her airborne wings, she is continuing a legacy of courage that began on the frozen hills of Korea over 70 years ago. The crowd fell silent as Master Sergeant Kim continued. Her grandfather, Master Sergeant David Chen, was awarded the Bronze Star for saving the life of his platoon leader, Lieutenant William Mitchell. Today, the son of that lieutenant is here to see David's granddaughter earn her place among the Rakkasans. Colonel Mitchell stood as Master Sergeant Kim gestured toward him, and the entire assembly turned to acknowledge his presence. He felt the weight of history in that moment. The connection between past and present, between sacrifice and service. Private Chen, Master Sergeant Kim said, turning back to Sarah. Your grandfather saved lives in Korea. He taught us what it meant to be soldiers. Today, you carry his legacy forward. Welcome to the brotherhood. As the wings were pinned to Sarah's uniform, not a dry eye remained among the Korean War veterans in attendance. These old warriors, survivors of one of America's most challenging conflicts, recognized in Sarah the same spirit that had carried them through impossible odds decades earlier. After the ceremony, Colonel Mitchell approached Sarah, who was surrounded by well-wishers and veterans sharing stories of her grandfather. When she saw him, she broke away from the group and snapped to attention. At ease, Private, he said with a smile. You've earned the right to relax. Sarah grinned, the first completely carefree expression he had ever seen on her face. Sir, I can't believe this is real. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in shelters and wondering if I'd ever amount to anything. Now I'm a paratrooper in my grandfather's unit. This is just the beginning, Colonel Mitchell reminded her. The real work starts now. I'm ready for it, sir. More than ready. Master Sergeant Kim approached them, moving slowly but steadily. Colonel Mitchell, it's an honor to finally meet William Mitchell's son. Your father was a good officer, fair, brave, and he never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Thank you, Sergeant Kim. Coming from someone who served with him, that means everything. The old veteran turned to Sarah. Your grandfather would be so proud today. He always said the army was about more than fighting wars. He said it was about building character, about learning what you're truly capable of. Sarah nodded. He used to tell me that the army would show me who I really was inside. I think I'm finally starting to understand what he meant. Over the following months, Colonel Mitchell stayed in touch with Sarah through letters and occasional phone calls. She excelled in her advanced training, volunteering for additional schools, and earning recognition from her instructors. Her letters painted a picture of a soldier who had found her calling. Someone who approached every challenge with the same quiet determination she had shown that rainy day in his office. 6 months into her first assignment, Sarah called with news that made Colonel Mitchell incredibly proud. "Sir, I've been selected for promotion to private first class, and I'm being recommended for sergeant school early. My platoon leader says I have natural leadership ability." "That doesn't surprise me," Colonel Mitchell replied. "Leadership runs in your family." "There's something else, sir. I've been working with the unit historian to research my grandfather's service. We found records of 2 other actions where he showed exceptional courage but was never recognized. The unit is going to recommend him for additional posthumous awards." Colonel Mitchell felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "That's wonderful, Sarah. He deserves every bit of recognition he can receive." "Sir, I've also been thinking about something. When my enlistment is up, I want to consider becoming an officer. I want to lead soldiers the way Lieutenant Mitchell led my grandfather." "Grain so." The colonel paused, considering her words. "That's a serious commitment, Private Chen. Officer candidate school is challenging, and the responsibilities of leadership are heavy." "I understand, sir. But I think it's what my grandfather would want. And I think it's what I want too. I want to be the kind of leader who brings soldiers home alive." As their conversation continued, Colonel Mitchell realized that Sarah had grown far beyond the desperate young woman who had walked into his office. She had become exactly what she had promised to be that first day. A soldier worthy of her grandfather's legacy. A year later, Colonel Mitchell received an invitation that filled him with pride. Sarah was graduating from officer candidate school and had requested that he attend the commissioning ceremony. She was to be commissioned as a second lieutenant and assigned back to the 187th Airborne Regiment as a platoon leader. At the ceremony, Colonel Mitchell watched with deep satisfaction as Sarah took the oath of office. When she raised her right hand and swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, he thought about her grandfather, who had taken that same oath decades earlier. After the ceremony, Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached him in her new dress blue uniform, the silver bars of a second lieutenant gleaming on her shoulders. "Sir," she said, "I have something for you." She handed him a small box, and when he opened it, he found a set of lieutenant's bars, obviously old and well-worn. "These belong to your father," she explained. "Master Sergeant Kim had kept them all these years, from when Lieutenant Mitchell was promoted to first lieutenant in Korea. He wanted you to have them back." Colonel Mitchell held the bars carefully, feeling their weight. They were tarnished silver, scarred from years of wear, but they represented his father's service and sacrifice in a distant war. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I can't thank you enough. Not just for these, but for everything you've shown me about courage, determination, and the true meaning of service. Sir, you gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw past the torn clothes and empty bank account to the soldier underneath. I'll never forget that." Lieutenant Chen was assigned to lead 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 187th Airborne Regiment, the same company her grandfather had served with, though now it was comprised of modern soldiers facing different challenges than those frozen hills of Korea. Her first platoon sergeant was a grizzled veteran named Sergeant First Class Johnson, who had heard the story of her grandfather and was eager to work with David Chen's granddaughter. "Lieutenant," he said during their first meeting, "I've been in this army for 20 years, and I've learned that the best officers are the ones who understand what it means to serve. From what I hear about your grandfather, and from what I see in you, I think this platoon is going to do just fine." Lieutenant Chen threw herself into her duties with characteristic determination. She studied tactics, learned her soldiers' names and backgrounds, and approached every training exercise as if lives depended on the outcome. Because she knew that someday, they might. Her soldiers quickly recognized her authenticity. She had been where they were, had struggled with the same challenges, had proven herself through the same trials. When she spoke about duty and service, they listened because they knew she understood the weight of those words. 3 years after that rainy day when she first walked into Colonel Mitchell's recruitment office, Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood before her assembled platoon as they prepared for deployment to Afghanistan. She had earned her Ranger tab, completed multiple advanced schools, and been recognized as the outstanding junior officer in her battalion. As she looked at the faces of the 30 soldiers under her command, she thought about her grandfather's words. That being a soldier was about more than fighting wars. It was about taking care of each other. About being worthy of the trust placed in you. About serving something bigger than yourself. Listen up, she told her platoon. In a few hours, we'll board the plane that takes us downrange. Some of you are nervous, and that's normal. But I want you to remember something. We're not just representing ourselves over there. We're representing every soldier who came before us, every family that sent us here, every American who trusts us to do our job. She paused, thinking about her grandfather and Lieutenant Mitchell, about the bonds forged in combat that lasted decades, about the thread of service that connected past to present. We're Rakasans, she continued, using the unit's nickname with pride. That means we never leave a fallen comrade. We never quit. And we never forget who we are or what we represent. Take care of each other, follow your training, and trust in the soldiers standing next to you. As her platoon prepared for deployment, Lieutenant Chen received one final letter from Colonel Mitchell, now preparing for his own retirement after 30 years of service. Sarah, he wrote, as you prepare for deployment, I want you to know how proud your grandfather would be of the leader you've become. You've exceeded every expectation, honored every tradition, and proven that character is more important than circumstances. Your journey from that recruitment office to where you stand today is a testament to the best of the American spirit. You saw a challenge and rose to meet it. You discovered your purpose and pursued it with unwavering determination. You honored your grandfather's memory by becoming the soldier he always knew you could be. Take care of your soldiers. Trust your training. And remember that you carry with you the prayers and pride of everyone whose life you've touched. Come home safely, and continue the legacy of service that connects our families and our nation. As Lieutenant Chen's plane lifted off from Fort Bragg, carrying her and her soldiers toward their deployment, Colonel Mitchell stood in his office looking at 2 photographs on his desk. One showed his father and Sergeant Chen in Korea, 2 young soldiers bound together by war and mutual respect. The other showed Lieutenant Chen at her commissioning ceremony, proud and confident in her new role as a leader. Between those 2 photographs lay more than 60 years of history, but the thread connecting them remained unbroken. Service, sacrifice, honor, and duty transcended generations, linking past to present in an endless chain of commitment to something greater than oneself. The young woman who had walked in wearing torn, faded clothes had indeed been transformed, but not by the uniform, or the rank, or the ribbons on her chest. She had been transformed by discovering who she truly was, by embracing the legacy of those who came before her, and by accepting the responsibility to lead others with courage and integrity. Master Sergeant David Chen's granddaughter had found her way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. And in doing so, she had honored not just her grandfather's memory, but the enduring values that make service members a family bound not by blood, but by shared sacrifice and unwavering commitment to duty. The tattoo on her shoulder no longer marked her as an outsider trying to belong. It marked her as a leader, carrying forward the finest traditions of the American soldier, ready to write the next chapter in a story of service that would inspire future generations long after her own time had passed.